welcome back, everybody. This is Maureen, and I'm here with Tanu, and we're here to talk about compassion today. It is the topic that we're coming in with. I know that we'll probably cover many things during this time together, but for the audience, the reason I wanted to have Tanu on for this conversation is that she and I met during Dr. Shafali's conscious parenting program and connected. We're lucky enough to sit together or join together in a circle of women where we kind of worked on the principles we were learning and began to talk about our lives and how the topics being offered affected us and how, you know, how could we understand everything we were learning and sort of process it and begin to apply it to our lives. And I'll have to say for me, of the many topics I learned about, compassion has been a really big one because as we'll get into today, I think it's a neglected sort of area. I think it's not one people have taken deeper dives into, even though there are really big bodies of work out there about compassion. And the reason I wanted Tanu to come on is because I know her to not only be an avid seeker of, I think, teachers, wisdom teachers who teach on compassion, but also just a person who's taken deep dives into the material. And I thought, Tanu, you'd be just the perfect person today. So I just want to welcome you and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Maureen. It's such a privilege to be here. And I'm excited to talk about this topic because it's so important to my heart.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I know, I don't know if it was a self-discovery around compassion and your interest in the material that came in the past few years or before that. But to begin with, I know you're one of the persons who sat with me who began in a much different career.
Yes. So I was actually working as a science researcher in a neuroscience lab, and then I had children, and I took a break. And that's sort of how my journey began, but it was very different from where we are right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, not a lot of compassionate talk going on in the labs around the world, I'm sure.
It's different, right? It's I think that compassion, like you said initially, it's not something that most of us engage in talking about. So it's not something that is very prevalent in most of our work cultures, I would say, in our society.
Yeah, yeah. And then you took the time off to raise your kids and begin those years with them. And I was thinking before we met, I mean, raising children requires a lot of compassion. It calls upon so many reserves from us
Mhm.
that, quite frankly, so many come a bit ill-equipped to provide for our kids. And I think that's one way in conscious parenting that compassion begins to be something we talk about in not only offering them, but offering ourselves first. But can you say a little bit about how you became interested in this topic?
Yeah. So I think when I became a parent, I myself was raised in a family where it was very much a dictatorship, very much a traditional parenting style. So when I had children, I just knew in my heart that I wanted to do it differently, but I didn't have any models for it. Um, and what ended up happening is that because of my background in science, I sort of threw myself into the child rearing psychology, child development, and things like that naturally. Um, and I memorized a lot of the scripts that many of the wonderful psychologists provide us with. Um, but when I had my second child, I wasn't able to keep up with the scripts because I was having postpartum anxiety and depression, and it was a difficult time for me. And that's when I started to turn to mindfulness and meditation, and that was probably my first introduction with compassion, where I did this self-compassion meditation, and I put my hand on my cheek, and the tears would just not stop flowing. And so that's the first time I think I remember my direct contact with, the work with compassion. But it wasn't until much later that I really became much more focused on it. So I also self-studied a lot of Dr. Kristin Neff's work, who is a science researcher who focuses on mindful self-compassion. And Tara Brach is another one of my teachers. And Dr. Shafali, Dr. Gabor Mate, Suzy Lula, all sort of have this underlying theme of compassion. And more I realized that this work cannot be done without compassion. And just healing my own relationship with myself really required me to become compassionate, because what ended up happening, as I was telling you about my parenting journey, I realized that I was just being really harsh with myself. I kept feeling like a failure. I kept feeling inadequate. And I realized that the key was to have radical acceptance and radical compassion for myself. And only then I could begin to transform any of my other relationships. That's sort of how I came to just really focusing on compassion. And I strongly believe now that you can have all the intellectual knowledge about this is what you should say to your child, or this is what you need to do in order to integrate some of your own traumas, perhaps. However, it's incomplete until you begin to have self-compassion. And only when we are able to be self-compassionate, we can offer compassion to other people that is actually authentic.
Yeah. So it's deep and it's layered. And thank you for sharing those pieces and parts of your journey and how they unfolded for you, sort of by even, I like how you were beginning with, you had that scientific kind of background. And so you started to turn to things that were probably developmentally, scientifically supported. And that appealed to you. And that's for a lot of people, because a lot that we kind of push it away. And if it's not rooted in science, then we're not, a lot of people aren't going to go there. So I like you pointing that out, because I think more and more we're finding that this work is supported by, it's just, we just sometimes assume it's not going to be. So you named Kristin Neff as a teacher. I've heard you talk a lot about Tara Brach's work, but and I've heard you talk, I think it was her in particular that has the R.A.I.N. And that's regarding compassion too. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a really neat framework. And I always like to just more and more give the listeners things that they can take away, even if it's something that they go look into more themselves. But yeah, what about that?
Oh yeah, I love that you're asking me this question, and I absolutely love Tara Brach's work. It has been so important in my own journey. And so it's a tool. R.A.I.N of compassion is a tool. And while this practice is not something that Tara Brach developed, it pre-existed. However, she has her own version, which really focuses on the compassion piece of it. And I have learned to rely on it a lot, especially during difficult times. So R.A.I.N is an acronym, and the R stands for recognize, and A stands for allow, I stands for investigate, and N stands for nurture. So this tool is basically a really beautiful and very practical way of reparenting yourself. And that's what I really love about it. So when you're practicing, how I do it, just if the listeners want to practice it, and Brach has a lot of resources. I hope I do it justice. Um, so when you are practicing, what you need to do is just kind of settle down and just, sit with silence for a couple of minutes. And then you could do this as a meditation, or you could do it as a journaling practice, or you could even do it with a buddy. I often do it with a buddy on a weekly basis. And then it just becomes, over time, it just becomes your go-to, and you could be doing it on your phone in a moment of distress. So just settle down and kind of center and just allow what's there to just attune to yourself, right? And then recognize. So in recognize, you are sort of separating yourself from the story. This person said this is what happened. And it's often very easy for us to get caught up in the story. So when we go to recognize, we're recognizing some of the main facts of what happened. And then we're also focusing on what are the primary emotions that this is bringing up for me. And just either, just getting present to them, or if you're journaling, just writing that out. And then just sitting with that for a few minutes. And once you have recognized, okay, I am feeling anger, I may be feeling sadness. Oh, I just realized there's shame. So once you have that, then you move into the next step, which is allow. The A of R.A.I.N, allow. And allowing, basically what it does is it helps us to move from our storyline into just welcoming what is here, right? And it also allows us to, as Brach says, that it allows us to see that this is just a wave, and then we can be the ocean. We're not that wave. So we're separating a little bit, creating some space from that emotion and just allowing it to be here, and kind of reminding ourselves that this too is part of our human experience, whether that's anger or sadness or shame or what have you. And once you have allowed it and you have reminded yourself that this too belongs, and I can hold this emotion as well. It's okay for it to be here. Then we move into the I of R.A.I.N, which is investigate. And while the word investigate may sound intellectual, the process itself is not. So it's very much shifting, using the allowing part and shifting from the storyline and thoughts into the felt perception. And this is where you ask yourself, okay, what am I believing? So what is the limiting belief under all of this? What is the most painful thing I'm believing? What feels most vulnerable right now? And if I could just really get in touch with that, where do I feel it in my body? And what does it feel like? Does it have a texture? Does it have, what sensation is it? Is it that my belly is clenched, or my jaw is clenched, or is my heart feeling heavy? Right? So just kind of getting really present to all of that. And then the next step is nurturing, the N of R.A.I.N. And in nurturing, this is the reparenting part, right? And so this is where you call upon either your own higher self, or if you believe in some sort of God, or some loving person in our life. For example, for many people, it could be their grandparents, or it could be some wise teacher. It could be Brach herself. So whoever you relate to most, and see them as this wise, loving persona. So just calling upon that. And I think Elizabeth Gilbert, the writer, talks about, she writes a letter to love every morning. So it could just be love itself, right? Whatever resonates with you. And kind of calling them in and now asking how this part of us that's feeling, whether that's sadness or shame or whether it's anger, or whatever our feelings are, how do they want this higher self or this loving, wise identity to be with it? And then offering that, part to, the nurturing. It may just be as simple as saying, darling, I care about your suffering. This is a line from Dr. Kristen Neff, actually. But it could be something like, I see you, I love you, or when we ask, how would you like this identity to be with you, you may get a response, and really tuning in to what is the need, that's unmet. And we often will find that we have this really, really young part within us that's just seeking for some reassurance, for some reminder, that says, you are lovable, you are good inside, and I see you, and I love you. So just offering that to those parts of us that are hurting. And you conclude the R.A.I.N with just checking in with yourself, like, what is my sense of being right now after having done this process? And has that shifted from when I started to where I am now? And maybe what is something that I want to take away? That I want to remember, that it may be a one-line mantra that came to you, some insight that may have come to you, and just kind of taking that away with us into our lives. So that's how.
I love it. Tanu, what a beautiful explanation. I think that you went through each step, just listening to it, the way you describe it, and with your voice, and just even, I noticed that the slowing down, the really, because what it reminds me of too is the way that I was taught, or not taught, to be with my emotions would be, as we always say, kind of suppressing them, not tending to them. So then we go in our life and we don't even know that we have this whole operating state underneath, like, seriously. And so that process was beautiful, because I think it mirrors, I have studied Susie Lula's The Language of Self-Compassion, her course. It might just be compassion or self-compassion, but that has similarities, but it's really calming down, slowing down. It feels like it's so good for our nervous system, because like you were saying, when you're in distress, when you have something flare up in your life, if you have the time and the space, and if you can make the time and the space, I would say too, have the question of, have you witnessed yourself go from a point of distress to just a radically different space within that process of R.A.I.N?
Yes, thank you. I want to really highlight something you said. So I told you that I have been practicing this process. I have it like on my calendar once weekly, and time again, when I have arrived for the meeting with my buddy, there's been times where I'm like, yeah, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about today, and yet there is something that comes up, and at the end of it, I am so grateful that I have this time of checking in with myself, because if I didn't, the alternative would be that I would go around my life projecting all of that pain, grief, shame onto my kids, especially onto all of my relationships. So it's been a really powerful practice for me to just make sure that I process what I would not have otherwise. And so it's been really helpful in that sense. And oh my gosh, I can't say that it solves all my problems, right? It doesn't. However, however, even in the midst of my distress, it has time and time again helped me move from hopelessness, move from where I'm just feeling intense shame, um, or just, a lot of sadness, into at least creating space,
Yeah. Hmm.
at least creating that little space where I can allow myself to kind of reach in and soothe myself, and allow presence to come through, allow my wiser self to come through, so that I'm not operating from my child self in my life as much.
Yeah.
And like I said, and then there's been times where it's allowed a major shift, where I came in with like so much distress, and then I'm leaving with like lightness. And you know it's just completely, it's a matter of perspective often, right? So it's like, before I'm seeing it from just like from my child self level, and then I'm able to take that, like Susie
Yeah.
Lula says, mountaintop view.
Hmm.
So it's been really powerful practice for me.
Oh, it sounds like it. It's just, and it's the softening, and it's the I always call it inner dialogue. I, you're right. Back to what you said in the beginning. My inner dialogue, my whole life has been really harsh, really punitive, really, and it's just, it's something that I, again, on some level, accepted that was going to be, ever present in my life. So it's proof that, that we can, when we turn inwards, soften and pay attention. Like, I like the beginning, the recognize, the allow, and without judgment, right? Without that allowance, just without judgment. Just it's not right or wrong. That was the big Shafali thing. Just, there's no, what she always called duality. There's not a rightness or wrongness. And if we can diffuse and take away any of those projections that we put upon what we're experiencing as being bad or wrong,
Mhm.
then we allow. Hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
um yes, so there is no uh judgment in the allowing, while there may be judgment that we recognize initially, like, oh, I'm judging myself. And in the allow, it's turning towards, like, of course I am allowing that, of
Yep.
course I'm feeling this way.
Yeah.
I think it's Susie Lula that says it's so understandable that I'm feeling this way. And yes, and absolutely, it's about that non-duality of there is no right or wrong, it just is. And how Dr. Shafali talks about accepting the isness.
Hmm. Yes.
So it's the same concept. And yes, I found all of the teachers to have that underlying theme of the acceptance of the present moment, and um, what would be the most compassionate thing to do in this moment, asking ourselves that, instead of operating from what Dr. Shafali might call the ego, or Susie Lula might call the survival self.
Yeah. 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 And I think it comes to me. Thank you for all of that. That just for that it's a process that we begin. You said something earlier about things can be intellectualized and in our head. And it does for our listeners. The work is worthy to begin. I mean, you can tell from Tanu's explanation that it's just really worthy work, and it's a process. And I think that even as um our circle, when we kind of talk about what's going on in our lives, you've all even witnessed me. I used to be a person that I don't consider myself an intellectual, but everything would be up here. And then if someone else would even try to apply compassion for me, to give it to me, I just wanted to just push it away. But that's probably a mirror into if I push away compassion, probably not that great at giving it to myself yet. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think that um, we often operate from this space of what Tara Brach calls the trance of unworthiness.
Oh, yeah.
So we have this limiting belief, uh, which was an adaptation, a coping mechanism as a child, where we had to adopt this belief that we are not worthy of compassion. And so when we are even given compassion on a platter, we feel so uncomfortable and it's so unfamiliar, that we're unable to receive it. And so, we can want intellectually people to be compassionate to us, but it isn't until we turn inwards and reparent ourselves and give ourselves that compassion and address that limiting belief. Oh, what am I believing? Oh, I'm believing I'm not worthy. Oh, okay, is
Mhm.
that really true? And that's how we can shift, and that's when we are able to begin to receive compassion. And I think that the more we do that, anything lesser would probably become unacceptable.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a great explanation. Yeah, and I really love that you have a date with a buddy when you were telling me that, because how perfect. I mean, you're creating a space within your weekly calendar that even if a person had, once a week, I mean, we want these dates to be more often for our working with ourselves. But kind of when you were talking about that, I was thinking like, oh wow, gosh, I don't usually think about taking myself on a date, but it's kind of a nice way to think of it, because we're courting ourselves and we're courting that the worthy part of ourselves that deserves to have this space. And what if there was this world where we did put these dates on our calendar with a buddy, with a friend who could process whether it was rain or just sacred listening and listening and just listening with compassion. And it's just a beautiful concept.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate what you're saying. It reminds me of Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. And she talks about having dates with yourself. And I love this idea of having a date with yourself where there's a surefire way of offering yourself compassion as well as processing, on emotions that need to be processed.
Right.
And, during the week, as I go on, if something major is happening or even something actually smaller is happening, because I tend to deal with the major things, but if it's small, I may just kind of say, oh, okay, it's not a big deal. Let's move on. But I can bank on that time that I will come back and
Yeah.
handle that and process it and integrate it instead of just letting it kind of get stuck in my body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can see, even I know you do a lot of the work of connection with body, and I don't know, I know that's been seeded in your work, like as you've studied different modalities. It sounds like the ones you just described, absolutely. Um, and you also have studied Gabor Mate's compassionate inquiry. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And how has that affected your work as a coach, and not just with yourself, because so far you've talked about how you work with yourself, but you are a conscious relationship coach too. So just all these modalities, and you use them both, like you said, with yourself but with your clients as well. And yeah, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about Gabor's work or just how it's affected your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, uh, it was an absolute privilege to learn from Gabor, and it really shifted how I approach my work, because um, Gabor really helped me understand that some of the what Dr. Shafali calls ego, or Susie Lula calls the survival self. These parts had no other choice
Mhm.
And it was a matter of choosing between a child's authenticity and their survival, which is basically connection with their caregivers, and they had to choose connection over their authenticity. And so just really having deep compassion for my clients and helping them have compassion for those parts of them,
Yeah.
where they adopted these adaptations, that Gabor calls a stupid friend who still thinks that you're three, and still gives you the same advice, which would have been really helpful, which saved your life at 3, but now it just gets you into trouble. So it's maladaptive. So yeah, it really has helped me have compassion for parts of my clients and their adaptations, as well as helping them see that it's not their fault, that
Mhm.
those are the coping skills that they had to adopt as children.
Yeah. And do you see too that, what I hear you saying is that when we are presented with certain scenarios in our childhoods, that we are watching from a child's eyes, that we begin to behave in ways that we have to kind of adapt to our environment, because possibly our true selves, the way we just came into the world, wouldn't be tolerated, whether it were, if I were a lively child and every time they were like, be quiet, I grew up with, I think, in the generation of seen and not heard. So many of us did. And that's transforming now, which is such a beautiful thing. But I learned to be quiet. And then what happened to me is, I remember, and I can see certain pictures of me in my childhood of Maureen, like good little Maureen, and they'd say, she's so quiet, she's so quiet. And I would be sitting there and I could see the pictures. It's sort of wide-eyed, but taking in everything that my elders were saying, and then transforming that in my mind to, I'm likable. I will be honored if I'm quiet, quiet. But is what happens to a person over their lifetime, that we get to our adult selves into our 30s, into our 40s, into our 50s, and we just are feeling this kind of almost like friction of what our true self is. If we've carried on that persona, that mask, that survival, that stupid friend for that many years, it's going to come for a lot of us to a head, almost like it's going to be where, whether it's a breakdown, whether it comes out, maybe in an illness, whether it comes out just in our relationships. Is that what you see? Is that the right idea? Like, for like, just to give an example for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the universe just keeps on presenting us with opportunities to wake up. And so, yes, I think that life keeps presenting us with opportunities and reminders that we need to wake up. However, because we are in that trance of unworthiness, because we're sort of hiding our true selves in order to protect it, behind those adaptations, behind that survival self, it's challenging, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
thank you for sharing so vulnerably. I just want to acknowledge you, that what a testament this podcast is for you to be exercising your voice after you received that message as a child.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. It's so true. And it's been a journey of transformation. And that's a really important point you make, because I think we can look to another and see what they're doing and think, oh, that's easy for her. But in fact, we all have our stories and we all have where we came from. And that's, I mean, if someone's sitting with me, whether it's a client or a sister or a friend, I know just by doing this work that we all have extensive backgrounds and places and hurts and woundings and painful places that we came from. And so, and we're in, even if we've gotten to a certain point where we can use our voice more and more, or it's all a work in progress till the day we die, is the way I see it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's Michael Brown who says in Presence Process that I'm not exactly quoting him, but the gist of it was that because we're human, we can't escape that we are
Yeah.
going to have some childhood wounds,
Yes.
no matter how conscious our parents are. And I see that every day in my life with
Right.
my kids. So, and yes, it wasn't our fault, like Gabor says, right? And as Suji says, and but it is our responsibility. So life is going to present us with opportunities, and
Mhm.
often I feel like they're not comfortable. They look more like challenges, right? They're not necessarily the comfortable places. So it is up to us to rise up to the call of life and
Mhm.
use it for our conscious growth and use it
Yeah.
for our awakening.
Mhm. Yeah. I think it's been such a good conversation around compassion and just the different things you've noted today, reparenting, um, coming to our survival mechanisms, our ego, whatever's operating within us that's not working anymore. I think that is because I feel like sometimes even if I use the word consciousness, that word can seem sort of lofty and it can seem like what does that mean? And but it's everything we're talking about today. It's all the work that's encompassed for we're human. That it's our work on this planet Earth. And I think when we're willing to begin to listen to these conversations, to open ourselves up to, oh, wow, I do have these emotional worlds operating within me. I'm going to get curious. I'm going to be willing. I'm going to sit with somebody who can guide me through it. And I think that's such a, I just sitting here listening, it's such a beautiful um, thing that coaches like you can offer is spaces with to sit with someone and be with someone who allows whatever's coming up for you, but to have these really fabulous tools to tap into ourselves. And sometimes it is using that outside tool before we just start to cultivate it and it becomes so natural to us. And as we know, we've been practicing for a while and it's not always the first thing you turn to. And right.
Yeah, absolutely. We're unlearning not only decades, but generational stuff here. So it's so understandable that it takes a lot of practice and intention. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said that because I know one of the cornerstones of your work has been the unlearning and the, I don't know if dismantling is or deconstructing of what comes down through the generations. Can you talk to that a little bit? Because I just love, I love that area of the changes, transformations we're committing to in this lifetime are deconstructing what's come before us and leading to healing. But I know you can say it better than that. So why do you love generational healing so much? And what is it?
Great question. Why do I love generational healing so much? Well, I think that, like I already said, it's not our fault, but it's our responsibility. So
Mm,
I, as a child, went through a lot of pain, and I'm sure I'm not alone. But I feel this really strong inner sense of responsibility to not pass that on to my kids because I know that pain firsthand. And while I had to, um, give up a lot of my authenticity, I am really grateful that there is still a piece of me that believes that that wasn't right, what was
yeah.
happening. And and I think that to some extent, all of us have that because there is this spark of consciousness,
Yeah.
awareness, or wisdom that resides in all of us because that's our essence, right? So, I absolutely feel that responsibility of not passing on the trauma, and
Mhm.
I think that many people don't realize that it's generational And also in my own journey, as I was very self-critical in the beginning as a parent, I thought it was just all me. I was just failing every day, and and then just realizing that, oh, it's actually generational. It's way bigger than just the few decades of life that I have lived. It's way bigger than that. Just even getting real with that helped me again have compassion for myself. And it's also really encouraging that there will be some generational patterns that I have broken that my kids would never even know were in the chain of what was passed down. And while I can't break them all, I want to break what I can. Yeah.
Oh, such a beautiful, beautiful kind of dive into just a little bit of generational healing. Just perfect explanation. I just have to reflect back to you that the sort of how you are alchemizing your work, both for yourself, but for the work that you're doing around consciousness and conscious relationship coaching, is such a it's just got so many juicy parts to it, with the compassion, with the generational healing, and just all these subcomponents of those. I think each of us brings in what is exactly there for us to heal, but that allows us to bring it to the greater world around us. And that's why I love these conversations so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It blows me away. Yeah. Well, Tanu, as we're finishing up today, I always like to ask, where can the listeners find you if they want to look into your work more? And just as an addition to that too, do you sometimes do coaching around some of the mindfulness, some of the compassion work that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think you can find me on Instagram at Stillwater Reflections. That's definitely a great place to connect with me. I do have a website that I am still in the middle of updating. It's stillwaterreflections.com, but like I said, it's not updated at the moment. I do offer workshops from time to time. I also offer mother support groups, and I offer book clubs that are related to, people who are seekers and healers. And of course, I offer one-on-one coaching.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, good. Well, I always put all the resources in the show notes so people can find you. But I just want to thank you so much for being here and contributing to our conversations on mystical sisterhood.
Thank you, Maureen. It has been such an honor to be here. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Okay. We'll see you next time, listeners. I hope that you really enjoyed the conversation today. If you did, and you know a friend who might benefit from it, please share. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit MaureenSpielman.com or MysticalSisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.